Hi, I'm Catherine from Literacy Volunteers. This is Civics Questions video series session 7, focused on the president. The Constitution sets up the government, and in the second part of the Constitution, they focus on the job of the president. As you will remember, the writers of the Constitution were very worried that any part of the government might become too much like the king. They didn't want the government to have too much power, and they didn't want any one person in the government to have too much power. So they separated power. They used separation of powers into different branches of the government. And the branch we're going to learn about today is the branch called the executive branch, and this is the branch that is led by the president. What does the executive branch do? The executive branch carries out the laws. So just as the legislative branch makes the laws, then the executive branch has to put those laws into place. So for example, if the executive branch says that students who cannot afford to buy lunch at school should be given free lunch, then the executive branch has to figure out the plan to make sure that all of those students will be able to get free lunches. They need to make sure there's enough food, that the schools can buy healthy food from farmers around the country and from other sources, other businesses around the country. They're going to spend money helping the schools pay for the extra food since they won't be charging the students money for that food. Okay, so the executive branch carries out the law that the legislative branch, that Congress, had passed. Who is in charge of the executive branch? The president. The executive branch includes a ton of workers. Many people work for the executive branch of the government, doing all sorts of things for the people of the country. And the person who is in charge of all of those workers, who's in charge of the whole executive branch, is the president. So who is in charge of the executive branch? The president. Name one branch or part of the government. You have a lot of choices for what you can use for this answer. We go with the president. Name one branch or part of the government. You can answer the president. Name one branch or part of the government. The president. How long do they serve? Senators serve for 6 years. So if you were elected in 2014, you serve until 2020. And then you would need to run again if you want to continue to be a senator, like Mark Warner did. Representatives are elected for 2 years. So every 2 years, we are electing our representative. Presidents serve for 4 years. So a president who was elected in 2016 serves until 2020. And then they could run again, like President Trump did in 2020. President Biden was elected, so he will serve until 2024. Presidents are elected for 4 years. We elect a president for how many years? 4. In what month do we vote for president? In November. It's always the first Tuesday in November, as long as the first Tuesday in November is not November 1st. So it's the first Tuesday in November, as long as it's November 2nd or later. Our presidential election, in what month do we vote for president? November. Who is the commander-in-chief of the military? The president. Congress will decide whether we go to war, whether we declare war. Only Congress can declare war. But any other action that the military is taking, whether we're officially declared to be at war or whether we're just dealing with some security and safety issues somewhere in the world, any actions that the military takes are decided by the president. He decides what troops will be positioned in what part of the world. He decides what equipment different sections of the military will get. The president decides where the different Navy ships are going to be located, ultimately. The military makes their recommendations, and the president is ultimately the commander-in-chief, deciding what the military will do. Who is the commander-in-chief of the military? The president. If the president can no longer serve, who becomes president? It has happened a few times in our history that the president has died. In one case, the president was shot and had to go get surgery, and they were worried about whether he was going to survive, although he did survive. While the president cannot serve, either because they have died or in that case because they're in surgery, the vice president becomes president when the president can no longer serve as president. If the president can no longer serve, who becomes president? The vice president. If the president and the vice president can no longer serve, who becomes president? If the president and the vice president died in an accident, for example, the next person in line is the Speaker of the House. So the person who is the leader of the House of Representatives would then become president. We have a full list of people who, if the people above them can no longer serve, who would be in line next, so that we never have to worry about a case where a bunch of people died in an accident or a fire or an explosion. If that happened, there's always one person who is not in the room with all of the others, so that we would definitely know who was serving as our president. If both the president and the vice president can no longer serve, who becomes president? The Speaker of the House. What does the president's cabinet do? The word cabinet, normally we think of kitchen cabinets, right? Where we keep pots and pans or plates. But the president's cabinet is a group of people who work for the president, whose job is to advise the president, to give the president advice about how to do a good job with the government. The people who are in charge of each of the major executive branch departments are the members of the cabinet. So, for example, the State Department is led by the Secretary of State, and that person is also an advisor to the president. The Secretary of the Treasury is in charge of the Department of the Treasury, and they advise the president, and so on through each of these major departments. So, for example, the Department of Transportation is led by the Secretary of Transportation. If the airports are trying to decide on a new safety plan or a different way to do security checks, the Secretary of Transportation might be advising the president about issues related to airports or other forms of transportation. What does the president's cabinet do? It advises the president. What are two cabinet-level positions? All of these positions, the leader of each of these departments, All of these positions are members of the cabinet, which means they would be called cabinet level positions. We're going to look at two examples. The Secretary of State works on relations with all of the other countries of the world. So here are pictures of the Secretary of State meeting with leaders from different countries around the world. The Secretary of State is a cabinet level position. The Secretary of Labor is another member of the President's cabinet. The Labor Department works on things related to workers. So factories, what are the conditions in factories for workers? What are the rules and laws around how much workers get paid or what the safety requirements are for workers? Any of those issues would be the focus of the Department of Labor, and therefore the Secretary of Labor would work on those issues and advise the president about things related to the Department of Labor. What are two cabinet level positions? Secretary of State and Secretary of Labor. Here are all of the questions we worked on today that you can use to practice. If you're following along in the textbook that we use, in Literacy Volunteers, these questions all come from Chapter 9. We'll see you next time.